this on, in your opinion?
But listen, I think it's since time immemorial, the access to the Chinese market, kind of this mystery of the Chinese market, has always drawn in the West, right? Whether it's the British coming there at first with the East India Company, or later the China, schooners from the United States, right? The China trade. It was always this thing about China. What we've seen, and I happen to believe that the Chinese economic system is built on a house of sand. And I think it's going to lead us to a greater financial debacle than 2008 ever was, in the same culprits, the exact same culprits that led to the financial crisis in 2008. The investment banks, the commercial banks, the hedge funds, the government entities, right? The same elites that led to that financial crisis and got bailed out and had no responsibility, no accountability, have been the same exact actors that have exacerbated the situation in China. And so, yes, the reason the world's elites, the party at Davos, the people on Wall Street, what I call the IR departments of China, which are the investment banks, particularly Goldman Sachs and some commercial banks, the lobbyists for China, which is basically the 25 or 30 largest corporations that deal in China today. They're lobbyists in Washington, D.C. These are all, and by the big private equity guys like Schwartzman, these guys, they're all going to have to be held accountable for what went on in China. What China was able to do in basically coordination with the elites in the West was deindustrialize the industrial democracies of the West, both Europe and the United States. That's why Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. What it is the exporting of Chinese overcapacity and Chinese deflation in basic industrial goods. And so China has, and from the Chinese point of view, it's been quite brilliant. They've essentially taken 350 million of their people from kind of working poverty to middle class, and 400 million people from abject poverty to working poverty. So essentially 2/3 of their population, because their population I really think is closer to 1.3 or 1.4 billion than what they say in 1.1. So what they've done is heroic in 30 years, okay, from a strategy point of view. But that has been exacerbated by the elites in the West, who basically kind of financed it and brought it along. In fact, the reason Trump was, I think, so special, he said, hey, this is not the way the world has to be. It can be very different. We've basically financed the rise of China. We've built China. And all he heard for years, and what you heard for years, is no, this is what I call the second law of thermodynamics, or this is an immutable law of physics, the rise of China. And what Trump says, no, this is through human agency. It's the commercial banks, the investment banks, the corporations, the kowtowed to the Chinese regime. And one thing I want to make sure, Kyle, I get up front, this is not about the Chinese people. I served as a naval officer over in China in the Western Pacific in the 7th Fleet on a destroyer in the mid-70s. I think 76, 77 is the first time I went to China. I've been involved in China virtually all my life. I've owned businesses over there. I've lived in Shanghai for a while in the French concession. I have a great, not just admiration, but a deep love for the Chinese people. In fact, they have a saying over there called old 100 names, which is basically the common man, because there's 100 last surnames in China. So old 100 names is essentially the deplorables, right? And those in the old 100 names is a sense of common decency, their grit, their determination. What they've been through as a people is nothing short of heroic. What we have, the problem we have, is we have a totalitarian regime of the Chinese Communist Party, and quite frankly, the leadership, the elite leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, that are really in business with the party at Davos, which is this, kind of scientific, engineering, managerial, financial, cultural elite that I say kind of emanates from the World Economic Forum in Davos, but really is in London and New York, Washington, D.C., Silicon Valley, right, et cetera.
And do you think the way that they've ingratiated themselves into, let's say, the Davos man, as is commonly referred to, the way that they've gotten there is it through economic coercion? Is it through investing in our universities, our think tanks, our lobbyists, as you said, and our corporations, and even the people that are U.S. citizens looking to make profits in China? Is that how they control that narrative?
Let's go back.
How do they get there?
Let's go back to, in 1 week, in January 2017, we had two, I think, seminal speeches. Okay, we had the Davos speech of President Xi.
Yeah.
Okay, which was a the high hosanna to globalism.
Yeah.
And it was, to me, repulsive. Repulsive. How the mainstream media and Davos man just sat there and bought it all and said, what a great leader, what a great humanitarian, what he's going to lead us through about climate, on the world's environment, what he's going to do, for globalization or for the economy. And then you saw Donald Trump's, inaugural address was, I think, 3 days later, in which he said, hey, we're getting back to the nation state. And America is going to start to focus on our sovereignty, and other nations should start thinking about their sovereignty. But this globalization and what's coming out of Davos is stripped our sovereignty from us, and we're going to reassert that. And 2 years later, which happened this week, was Mike Pence's speech about the new strategy of the United States, which has really been going along for quite a while, which is now kind of engaging China. Right? An engagement with China, but not like Henry Kissinger and not like the Thucydides trap crowd. And I know you did this seminal interview with Graham Allison, but not what those guys want, which is to kind of us stumble along and play along with China. This is, this is a direct confrontation with China to say, we're not going to take it anymore. You've been in economic war with us, and we're going to reassert us. Your question about how they ingratiate themselves, they're the guys who wrote the biggest checks. Right. They wrote checks to the universities. They wrote checks. They've essentially bought off the City of London and Wall Street and the corporations. I say this in a sense of kind of anger. The great investment banks in London and in New York became the investor relations department for this regime, okay?
In the pursuit of profits.
In the total pursuit of profits. Yes. And corporations became their lobbyists. When Lee He's deputy came to the United States about 4 weeks ago, when they had this kind of last round of trying to put something together in a trade deal, there wasn't much going on, but he sent his deputy and a small contingent to see Steve Mnuchin and the guys at Treasury. They went to, the very first stop they made was to, the day before they went to Treasury, they stopped and they had a meeting with, I think it was 15 or 20 large corporations, the heads of government affairs, and I think the presidents, not the CEOs. Because the guy wasn't high enough. And he basically said, hey, boys, you have a problem, right? And you have to figure out how to help us fix it, okay? Another thing, they had, Wang Qishan announced this kind of financial advisory panel. Being on their back foot by the Trump strategy, they kind of said, hey, we need a financial advisory panel to help us understand what the United States wants, what the United States needs. And it was named, Paulson and Schwartzman and all these characters. And it's interesting, when they need somebody to kind of come over and, help intermediate with the United States, they go to the same guys that have been profiting on this. My understanding is that people came back and said, hey, the UN General Assembly is happening. It's opera season in New York. My schedule's full. And Wang Qishan said, hey, boys, I don't think you're listening. We're having a meeting. I want everybody to show up. This is general quarters. And so, no, I think when we look back on this, it's going to be, people are going to be absolutely stunned when they see how the elites, right, of the Western democracies and the United States went along with China and exacerbated a situation when it was quite evident they were at economic war with us.
Yeah. Going back on this one issue, the way that the influence is being pushed through the corporations, we at our firm know that there are there's a couple of handfuls of corporations that each have more than $1 billion in capital that they're trying to get back from China. And they've been unable to get a dime out of China since November of 2016, when China closed its capital account completely. When you were in the administration, did you interface with any of these companies that were going through a lot of, pardon the pun, red tape, trying to get their money out of China?
Listen, the very first thing.
Did they come appeal to you?
Yeah, I think this will be a big shocker to people. Remember, when Trump won in a complete, upset that nobody saw coming, and particularly you have this post-war, liberal, democratic, rules-based order, okay? The Chinese have done nothing but game the system from day one on every set of rules. The rules are what they determine they are, okay? And nobody calls them on it. because everybody thinks they're too weak. And so in the corporations, I think until
the corporation's afraid to call them on it because they know if they say 100%. That we can't get our money out, they shut their business off.
Shut down.
There's a quid pro quo.
Shut down. They absolutely fear it. Look at when they came back on this whole, by the way, on the entire situation with the tariffs, and tariffs are just not about tariffs and not about protectionism. That's why Trump's done it at such a scale. Remember, before Trump got here, people were talking about $25–30 billion of tariffs. It was like, oh my God, that's so huge. Trump's program is $500 billion in tariffs, right, to tariff goods, because he knows the Chinese can't respond.
Correct.
And here's why they can't respond. People in the United States have to understand one thing. The Chinese look at us as a tributary state to them, and let me explain that. China's been around for 4,000 years, right? They've had good runs and they've had bad runs, okay? But one thing they know, and the reason they're still organized as a nation over 4,000 years, right? They know how to handle allies and they know how to handle bad guys, okay? Now what they've done is they got this system called barbarian management, and they know how to manage barbarians. The way they manage the barbarians is they take the leaders of the barbarians and they give them a taste of the good life. And you're going to be something special. You're going to get a special deal. Now, what happens back into the tributary state is whatever happens. That's your problem. Right. Okay? So in the United States, what they have done for 25 and 30 years is played as a barbarian state, barbarian management. Okay? They incentivize our elites, and our elites deindustrialize, particularly the upper Midwest of this country. It's the reason Donald Trump's president. Your audience should understand one thing that's important is that, you know, J.D. Vance, the great guy from Yale who wrote Hillbilly Elegies, is the best sociological study of the Trump voter. And it was J.D. Vance who told me, he says, hey, those studies that come out of MIT and Harvard show that there's a direct correlation between the factories that left for China, the jobs that left with them, and the opioid crisis. Because this is not about tariffs. It's
actually logic.
It's not about tariffs. What this is about is human dignity and self-worth. Those factories went, Wall Street made the money, the corporations benefit from it for lower costs, and devil catch the hindmost on the workers. And so this is what Trump is kind of totally reversed. Now, what China sees us as is we're a tributary state. We send them natural resources, soybeans, beef, cattle, Boeing Airlines, and Apple products. Oh, excuse me. We don't send Boeing Airlines and Apple products. You know why? Because they forced Boeing to do a joint venture, and they forced Apple to make the products over there. So we're Jamestown to their Great Britain. Okay, and that's why the tariffs at the scale that Trump put them up at, they can't respond to. Okay?
We will make America great again.